In the civilized countries, I believe there are no witches left, nor wizards, nor sorceresses, nor magicians. But you see, the land of Oz has never been civilized, for we are cut off from the rest of the world. Therefore, we still have witches and wizards among us.
Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and I want to start things off by talking about the greatest film of all time. The 1939 Technicolor movie musical spectacular based on the first American fairy tale, L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. A movie so magical that it only made sense for the Walt Disney Studio to take the reins on producing a sequel. But when that sequel arrived, instead of this Oz, we got this Oz.
Come here!
It's basically a Disney horror movie. And it's amazing. At least I think it's amazing. I mean, people have had mixed thoughts on this film since it came out 30 whatever years ago, but I think film critic Dave Kerr best summarized it when he called Return to Oz bleak, creepy, and occasionally terrifying. Occasionally. People really don't know what to make of this movie, and I think it's because it's billed as a sequel to the 1939 film, but there are a ton of differences. First of all, it's not a musical. Second of all, none of the classic characters that we fell in love with from the first movie are in this movie except for Dorothy, but even she's significantly younger and a totally different character type than what we got with Judy Garland. And third, and most importantly, it gives us a different answer to the most important question of all. Is Oz a real place? First of all, it's worth noting that in the original Oz books by L. Frank Baum, there was no question about it. Oz was 100% a real place. And I don't mean that it was like a metaphorically real place that was supposed to represent heaven like Narnia or Neverland. No. Oz was a spot that you could find on the map. And just to push that idea even further, L. Frank Baum started to credit himself not as the author of the Oz books, but as the royal historian of Oz. So he claimed that he was just notating down the stories as they were sent to him by Dorothy or by Ozma. And even to this day, the title of Royal Historian of Oz continues to be held by authors who are writing canon Oz books. The current Royal Historian of Oz, who was selected by the Baum Family Trust, is Sherwood Smith. But for now, for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to focus on the L. Frank Baum books. There were 14 of them. L. Frank Baum never specifically told us where on Earth Oz was supposed to be, but there are some clues that indicate it might be close to Australia. But the main reason that Oz is cut off from the rest of civilization is because it is surrounded on all sides by the deadly desert, a seemingly unending stretch of sand that has the ability to turn anyone who touches it into sand as well. And on top of that, in Book 6, The Emerald City of Oz, Glinda casts an invisibility spell of some kind that just makes sure no one else from the outside of Oz world can get into Oz. So that's why we don't know about them. That's why we need a royal historian of Oz to tell us about Oz. By the time the MGM film was released in 1939, there were 33 published Oz books, and the MGM film did probably the smart thing and chose to ignore 32 of them. In fact, I'd almost say 32 and a half because that movie cuts out a lot. Like characters, locations, subplots. It focuses the story on the core idea of trying to get home and learning that there's no place like home. And that was the right decision, and that's why it's the greatest film of all time. But the other huge adjustment that the film makes is the choice to portray Oz as a dream. And that's just something that's not up for debate whatsoever. The facts are there and clear. When Dorothy wakes up at the end, everything's in sepia tone again. The house is there, intact with a little bit of tornado damage. Plus, everyone that she met in Oz is a very clear counterpart to someone who exists in real life. And when she wakes up, she no longer has her wash and brush up company makeover hair. So really, Cut, dry, and simple. It was a dream. There's no place like home. It's done. Good night. Now let's talk about Return to Oz. The reason this movie is so wonderfully weird is because it put back a ton of that Oz material from the other 32 books that the first film cut out. We're talking wheelers, gnomes, a woman with a collection of interchangeable heads, the Princess of Oz being held captive. But the biggest difference? How it chooses to portray the reality of Oz. And of course, because nothing can be simple, it's not as cut and dry as in the 1939 film saying Oz is a dream, or the 33 Oz books saying Oz is a real place. In fact, the entire film is built around the conflict of Dorothy believing Oz is real and the adults believing that Oz is a dream, and the film never gives us an answer. Right away, the first half hour of the film shows us various signs which may or may not be the people of Oz trying to communicate with Dorothy in Kansas. And we, as the audience, have to decide if we're going to believe Dorothy or if we're going to believe the adults. Dorothy finds a key in the yard and thinks it's from her friends in Oz. Auntie Em recognizes it as a key to the old house that was destroyed in the Twister. Dorothy sees a shooting star and thinks it's her friends trying to communicate with her. Auntie Em and Uncle Henry just see a shooting star. So, of course, they do what any loving caregivers would do in that situation. And they sign Dorothy up for experimental shock therapy. And I'm not joking. Dorothy is dropped off at a hospital where the head doctor in charge is experimenting with shock therapy because we're about to enter a new age, a new century, the 20th century. Apparently the age of electronic lobotomies, because that's essentially what he is going to do to Dorothy. He straps her down and then he gets the machine all ready to go, and then just as soon as those electric things that have the electric currents touch Dorothy's head, the power goes out. And she escapes the hospital, then she waywardly ends up going to Oz. But there is a very strong case to be made for the fact that as soon as that machine touches Dorothy, it scrambles her brain, and everything we see from that point on could be a terrifying hallucination. And that's not even the most disturbing part of this movie. You want to know what the most disturbing part of this movie is? It is right at the end. Dorothy has had her adventure. She ends up back in Kansas. Oh, also spoiler warning. And she's home, safe and sound, but before she left Oz, her new friend Ozma, Princess of Oz, who she rescued from a mirror. Long story. You really need to see the movie if you haven't. Anyway, Ozma of Oz says, "I will send you home on one condition. I will check up on you every now and then." And she does. So Dorothy's first night home, she's looking in her mirror in her room, and then all of a sudden, Ozma appears. And this is significant because it is the first time in any Oz movie that we see the two worlds crossing over into one. So Dorothy does the natural thing. She calls Auntie Em because she finally has proof that Oz exists right there in her mirror. But as soon as she calls Auntie Em, Ozma in the mirror goes, "No, no." So she's telling Dorothy that the adults can't know that she's there. And then Dorothy gets it and plays along. And as soon as Auntie Em comes running and says, "What is it, Dorothy?" she says, "Oh, nothing. Just my reflection." And Auntie Em seems happy enough because for once Dorothy seems content and at peace. Maybe this experimental therapy worked. But in reality, one of two things is happening here. Either Oz is real and Dorothy is going to continue communicating with its citizens in secret, or Oz is in her imagination, and she's going to continue communicating with its citizens in secret. Both possibilities are pretty bleak, because this is no longer the happy Dorothy full of joy and wonder. This Dorothy has been put through literal torture imposed on her by the two figures that kids are supposed to be able to trust the most: doctors and their guardians. So no matter how much joy Oz might bring her, Dorothy has now been conditioned to not share that with anyone, because now she can only trust herself. And regardless of whether or not Oz is a real place, that's really bleak. But the true genius of this film is the fact that it leaves everything open-ended enough for us to have these interpretations and for us to read the film differently. And on top of that, it takes place at Halloween, and it's got a lot of delightfully creepy visuals. So I love this movie. But for now, friends, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. Let me know in the comment section down below. Do you think Oz is a real place or not? And if you want to follow the rest of my Halloween movie marathon, make sure you do not miss out on a future episode by subscribing to the channel if you have not done so already. It's super easy. All you need to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Tea Cup for One. There's no place like home.